Okay, today we're going to do a full walkthrough from start to finish. It's been a while since I pushed an update, and there's been quite a lot of changes, and I think it's going to be pretty useful for everyone to be able to see all the different new features and how they work and how you can use them. I'll try to split the video up into chapters, as I know it can be a little bit long to go through the whole thing, and you might only be interested in certain features, but we'll give it a go and see how well we get on. So first of all, we need to start off with installing. So you can head over to the Chrome Web Store, and from there, all you need to do is search for Maestro DMX, and the extension's going to pop right up. As you can see, I've already got it installed, but you click on that, you click install, and away you go. And as soon as you do that, this page is going to pop up. So this is basically the settings page, and this is the main place where you can control probably 90% of the features and functionality. But first of all, what it also does, and if we activate the extension and we reload, once we've activated the extension, we reload the Maestro page, you'll see that the footer pops up. So the footer was one of the very first features that we added because there was a number of different issues, such as the inability to latch the buttons, and also they're only available on the show page, which is normally fine, but there are plenty of occasions where I might have been sort of popping around in the settings or something, and then I couldn't get quick access to a button at the right time. Equally, also not being able to latch certain things at the time, like the Blackout, was really quite frustrating, but that's been improved in version 1.3, and now you've got the option built in to switch them buttons into latches. I personally prefer having both, just because it gives me double the options, and I don't have to remember about the latches, because when I tested with the latches switched on, I found that there were a few occasions where I didn't realize it was latching, and then I was getting confused, and it was just making a bit of a mess. But in this situation, I've got both options. If I just want to do a momentary blackout, blinder, or strobe, they only work when I hold the buttons. But if I want them to latch, then I can use these buttons. Of course, they will stay on until you click them off. Again, they're available on every page, which is super useful. And that's, apart from that, on the main screen, the other thing you're going to notice are in the bottom left corner. There's a few things. So first of all, there's a gear icon, which is going to be a link to get you back to the main settings page whenever you need to get there, in case you close it or something. The other thing is, of course, is showing you the firmware version, which is currently 1.3 on my Maestro, and a clock, which is just really convenient for me, especially when I'm running it full screen. And equally, also, I've added here the audio volume meter for the audio input, and a meter showing the audio activity. These are exactly the same icons as you're going to find on the audio tab, bars rather, the pre-gain level and the audio activity. The only difference is, of course, is that they're available on every page in the footer, and that's super useful, especially when I've had a couple of situations where, for whatever reason, the audio inputs just stopped working, although I must admit in 1.3 it seems to be stable. That did happen to me once or twice in 1.2. And also, I think I had a scenario where I accidentally knocked the wrong button on the mixer, and I didn't realize, because the sound was still coming out the speakers, but then the lights stopped reacting, and I realized, oops. And by having this here and visible, I can see all the time that the audio is coming in. I find that very useful. So that's the main advantage on the Maestro interface, and it's very loosely coupled, so it doesn't really interfere with anything else. And of course, there is an icon in your settings menu, which you can click to get to a quick menu to deactivate or reactivate the plugin at your wish, and then it will stop and disappear completely. You don't have to uninstall the extension to turn it off if you just don't want it on for a moment. But as I say, the main stuff is all in the settings page, and again, even if I close that, I can click on that gear icon and it will get me right back. So first off, there is a few tabs in the top, and at the top, they're mainly informational or global switches. In the bottom, it's more specific modifications or functionality. But of course, the best place to start is with getting started. And the first thing you need to do is, of course, make sure that you can connect to the Maestro. Now, hopefully, if you've been able to open up your browser and view under the Maestro.local, then it works and you don't need to do anything. But if you had to use an IP address or one of the built-in IP addresses, as I've sort of explained here on the getting started, then obviously you could access it through that. If you're using a different IP address, then this extension simply won't run because it has no way of knowing what random IP address you might have chosen. So you need to basically ideally use the Maestro.local, which should work. And there is some instructions on how to get that working by editing your host file in case it doesn't. But it's pretty straightforward, and I suspect in 9 out of 10 cases it should just work out the box. The other information here is about creating macros. There's a lot of information here on how to create macros, but before we get to that, I think we should go through some of the other more sort of base features, as I think with the macros there's a lot more to it and it will make more sense later on. So one of the next main sort of functions we added was strobe triggering. So there is a sort of persistent issue where a number of different fixtures simply don't respond to the strobe. This seems to tend to be when you are using fixtures which are, for example, moving heads or such like that tend to have color wheels and such stuff, or it can happen to others. I mean, I have the same issue with funnily enough, with a UV strobe, which simply they don't respond well to fluctuating the dimmer, which is pretty much how it works, or fluctuating an RGB channel if you have RGB. But again, there's a color wheel here, so there's no RGB, there's just a dimmer. These devices just simply don't respond. But what they do have is a dedicated channel, which is for the shutter and strobe, which is actually a shutter in this case. But that it doesn't matter, actually. It works for a shutter or a strobe. In this case, the default value is 255, which just means shutter open. But if I want to get this thing to strobe, then I need to change that value to a different value. And in this case, the value is somewhere between 100 and 250, I believe, somewhere thereabouts, depending on the speed of the strobe. Now, obviously, I can't do that every time I want the thing to strobe. So what we do is we basically use the extension to predefine those strobe values, and then we connect that with the main strobe button, or the strobe button in the footer, whichever one is preferable, and it basically will allow you to just click the button, and it will not only strobe the fixtures that will respond to the dimmer, but it will also ping a message to those fixtures that don't and tell them change your strobe value. And then when you let go or you switch it off, it will tell them to go back. It's instantaneous. It happens in milliseconds. It works fantastic and really sort of solves that problem. And the way you set that up is by telling the extension what is the values that you need for the shutter open and the shutter and the strobe value, or the shutter value where the strobe is. And you can do that from this fixtures tab. So you can see in my test example here, I've got loads of different fixtures in here, some megahex bars, etc., etc. But I've also got those 100-watt LED spots. Now I know, because I've checked, that as I showed before, that the open value is 255. So that's my open value of where I want it. So that's my open value. And I know that to strobe that fixture around about the speed I want, I need it about 200. So once I set these to 255 and 200, like so, that's going to be saved in my browser. It's not going to forget that. So if I reload the page, it's still there. That basically is all I need to do. And in the background, it's going to work. It's going to connect to that strobe button. And when I click that strobe button, it's going to strobe those fixtures. I also have the BUV463, which is a UV strobe, which actually doesn't respond to the dimmer either. But I know in this case, the open value is 0 and the strobe value, which matches with the others, is around 150. I also have these IR4s. They are both lighting IR4s, and they also don't respond well. They do actually work with the strobe, but it's like very, very glitchy. Perhaps that's something to do with the Wi-Fi, but I don't need to worry about that because, again, I can set these, and I know, again, these ones, the open value is 0, and the strobe value, which matches up, is around 150. So I can set these to 0 and 150, and that's basically it. There are some others in there that are disabled. I can set them too. It doesn't matter. They're not being used at the moment. It's just for testing. And that's that. So all the other stuff in here doesn't matter. It works, or I don't care, and I'm leaving it, and that's it. It's done. I've done it once. I've set them up, and now when I come along and I flick that that strobe button, I'm going to see that it's going to not just do the strobe, but it's also going to send a message. So I can actually show the message going out in the network when I click this, that it's sent a message to all those different fixtures saying, hey, turn your strobe on. Or when I let go, it's going to send another message saying, turn your strobe off. And that's it. It just worked. Completely worked. No issues whatsoever. Fantastic feature. And really improved my show dramatically, as now all my fixtures strobe in harmony. The next thing we can look at is AutoFog, AutoStrobe and Effect. So there is AutoMacros, but we'll come back to that once we get to the macros. So AutoFog gives you the option of enabling the fog machine or smoke machine, whatever, haze machine, doesn't matter what it is, as long as the channel is set in the profile as fog, it'll work. And on this, you've got two options. So you've got a global switch to enable the fog on and off completely, and then you can either enable AutoFog on audio activity, which basically means that when the audio level, as per the blue bar here, reaches over the minimum value you've set, which I've got currently at 95, it will trigger the fog machine for 3 seconds and then switch it off. There is also a fail-safe here, which is the minimum interval. So if you've got a particularly jumpy track that tends to peak over 95 and drop, peak and drop, peak and drop, instead of every time that happens, which could happen in a matter of 10 seconds, for example, it won't keep triggering the fog machine, because it has a minimum delay of at least 2 minutes before it will be triggered again, no matter how many times it goes over. So that's one thing. You can also, separately, trigger it on a timer, which can be anywhere from 1 to 15 minutes for anywhere from 1 to 30 seconds, although I'm not sure why you'd want to spray fog for 30 seconds, but you can. In this case, it's set to come on every 10 minutes for 3 seconds. I'm not going to test that at the moment because it's not necessary. Okay, so with the global switch enabled, I can then obviously turn on this AutoFog and activity. At the moment, it's set to not trigger until the audio goes over 95. Also, you'll notice when you go back, you'll see this fog icon appears here, which is just a reminder from this page that the AutoFog is on, whether it's the timer or the audio level. So at the moment, it's set to go off after the audio goes over 95 for a duration of 3 seconds with a minimum non-repeat time of 1 minute. So we can actually, can probably speed that up a little bit. If we drag this gain up a bit, there you go. We forced the activity level up and triggered the fog. It's gone on for 3 seconds, and of course it's dropped off. And now, no matter what I do, if I drag it all the way up again, it's not going to trigger before that minimum interval, which is, as I say, currently set to 1 minute. Anyway, we can turn that off and move to the next feature. So yeah, again, you can do it on timer. You can set it to go off anywhere from every minute to every 10 minutes or thereabouts, and that's gonna work. So the duration is anywhere from 1 to, I believe, 30 seconds. Yeah. So that's your option. So yeah, you can turn that on or not. Very similar to this is the next feature, which is the AutoStrobe and AutoEffect. So these two are gathered here together. So the AutoStrobe, they both work basically exactly the same way. The only difference is, of course, is that when you enable the AutoStrobe, it is going to trigger the strobe. In this case, let's turn that up for 3 seconds so it's more visible, and turn the interval down, and that's turned on. And now, as soon as the music, well, you can set this level to whatever you want, anywhere from 50 up to 95. It depends on the genre of music, the type of music, how active it is, and so on. I mean, you can play with those thresholds until you get it to a place that's happy for you. But now it's switched on, you'll see that fog icon's gone away because the fog's off, and instead a lightning bolt has appeared because there's an auto feature, auto strobe in this case, turned on. So the activity level now is a bit low. If I drag this up again, there we go. I'm going to just trick it into triggering. There you go. It's gone on for 3 seconds, gone off. And of course, it's going to now not come back on for at least a minute. The auto effect works exactly the same way. If I turn the auto effect on, turn that duration up and that down again, it's basically going to trigger the same way. You can obviously set the values different. There we go. I just force that to come on just to show it, and it goes off again. You can set them both the same, different values, whatever. You can set different durations, different intervals, and you can enable them. And as I say, those icons will pop up. In fact, I can make them all pop up if I put all of these on, like so. In a moment, those icons are all going to appear here. Just there you go. The fog and the AutoEffects icons are popping up so that we can clearly see from the main show page that we've left that switched on. And those are those main features up here. Of course, we have backup and restore. So this is basically gives you a couple of options. So backup fixtures is going to connect to your currently loaded stage. It's going to download the configuration for every fixture, and it's going to store it locally in your browser as a backup. It's not quite the same as downloading the stage from the actual Maestro. That's going to download some other bits and pieces, other settings, and so on and so on. And I would recommend you do that anyway, just as a way of keeping a copy in case you have some issue and you want to get back. Before you start fiddling with anything, it's always good to keep a backup, so I'd recommend you do that anyway. But the convenience of this is that, what I can do, and I'll show you in a moment, is I can actually fiddle with all the settings. I can store those settings in the macro, and instead of having to go back and undo them all, I can just restore the backup that I took before I started fiddling with the settings, which is a lot faster, and I don't need to remember what I've changed. So that leads us nicely on to macros. So macros is probably one of the most powerful features in the entire application. Again, there's a lot of information here about the kinds of ways you can trigger macros and so on. We're not going to cover that yet. We'll come to that in a minute. We'll start just with a simple macro for now. So obviously this is a clean setup. I've got no macros defined yet. But let's create one. So I can think of many scenarios where I might want to use a macro, but I'm going to start with something super simple, which is I want to have my movers point into a specific point in the room, and I want them to go there on command. So my movers in this case are these 4 spots. You can see they've got an icon next to them showing that they've been detected as movers, and there's also one at the top. Now, this will get you into the pan tilt finder. You can use this tool, the finder, to try to figure out what position you want this moving head in. And you can do it per moving head, as I've done here. I've picked the first one. And I can do that by either dragging my dot around the kind of floor space here until I've got it where I want it, which in my case is probably around about there. Or I can do it separately by dragging this, or of course I can move the numbers bit by bit. So I can do that per fixture. I can also reset it. Now, this is modifying live, so it's actually, you can watch the head moving around and it will stay wherever you leave it. But for my test now, I want to modify all of them at once, and I want them all to go in the same place. So in that case, if I come up the top here, it's going to show me that it's going to modify all of these. We'll ignore the last one. That's just a dummy that I've been using for testing. And now, as I move this around, all of the moving heads are going to basically go wherever I tell them to. And in my case, I want them, let's say, to be around about there. And that's done. That's modified them live. And that change is active now already. And this is what I said about why I took the backup before, because the backup is before I'd started doing any of this, and I can restore back to that once I've sort of set up all my macros and I've got them where I want. So for now, that's my first thing, what I want to do, and I've positioned them. And now I want to save that as a macro. So what I do is I go back to the fixtures and I select the movers or the fixtures I want to add, and I choose to create a macro. And in this case, I'm going to call this movers front, and I'm going to save that. So that's it. It's showing me straight away. It's got a macro. It's affecting these 4 fixtures, and that's what it's going to do. Now, I can go and reset them by clicking on that. It's going to put them all back to where they was. And then I'm back to where I started. The only difference is when I saved that macro, I saved the snapshot of a state in time of where the settings, what was the settings of those fixtures. If I'd have changed some other settings as well, it would have stored them as well. In fact, I can compare the macro with the currently running profile, and I can see that what it wants to change is the pan tilt of all those fixtures with a specific low and high value. and that's my first macro, and I can use that. I click play, and that macro is going to pretty much instantly apply. The movers are going to go where I told them to, and they're going to stay there until I click stop. Doesn't matter what the Maestro is doing. This will set it in such a way that it can't interfere. So that's the first simple one. Now, What if I didn't want to necessarily control the movement, but I wanted to, for example, pick a specific gobo or perhaps a specific prism? Well, what I can do now is I can use the fixture toggles. So yes, you can do this from the Maestro on the control page. You can go in and you can say, well, I want to have just, let's say, this gobo called Windows. And the way I can force that is by deselecting everything else. Now, in my case, I've got 2 gobo wheels and a prism, so I need to pretty much deselect all of it to force that on. And yeah, I can do it, but I've got to do it per fixture, one after the other if I want all 4 of my main movers to look like that. Well, that's pretty long-winded. So what we've got here is the option to basically say, let's turn them all off. So I've just turned off all of the gobos and all of those moving heads. The only one that's been left is open. And that's just because it's the basic one. So now I've done that, if I wanted to have, let's say, I've got 2 gobo wheels, so let's just pick one from the first gobo. Let's just pick Galaxy. If I want Galaxy, then I can just go in and I can select Galaxy on them all. Of course, if I've got Galaxy in open still, the Maestro will jump between them. So if I want to force just Galaxy, well, I go in and I switch just Galaxy and I turn off the open gobo. So I can do that again here. And this one, there we are. Turn on Galaxy here, switch off the open, and do the same on the last one, and we're done. The other gobo's in open position, so it doesn't matter. I can also do the same for the prisms, so I can switch off all the prisms if I want. So I've done that. I can also use these buttons to switch off the gobos or the prisms or back on and off per fixture. So right now I've set all of those 4 movers to have the Galaxy gobo. I'm going to show one other feature at the same time because I think it's very well related, and that's focus and zoom. If you've got a fixture with a focus, a manual focus, that is at least controllable through DMX, then very frequently, and exactly I have this problem, is that the focal point and the setting is different depending on which gobo wheel is active or whether the prism is on or off. Now, in my case, when I'm using the first gobo wheel, I know that focused is around about 200. So I want to include in this macro, not just that I force the gobo, but I've also set the focus. So now when I activate it, I'll set the gobo and the focus, which is exactly what I want. So I've applied those settings. I'm going back to those fixtures. I'm adding a new macro, and I'm going to call this gobo Galaxy Focused. So that's it. I've created that macro, but those settings are still active because, as I said, we've set them. And they're not going to go away until we unset them. And we can do that by going back to the fixture toggles, toggling all of them all back on and all of the prisms back on, and then obviously resetting our focus to whatever it was. It doesn't matter what it was in this case, but that's what it would do. And then, of course, we can see, well, again, now how does this macro differ from what's running live? And well, now we can see lots of changes because we've switched off tons of gobos, we've switched off prisms, we've set on specific gobo only. We've also set the focal point and so on and so on. And I can run that macro, and in a matter of milliseconds, it's applied all those settings to those movers, and that's now active, or I can stop it. There really is almost no limit to what you can store in the macro. At the moment, the only one setting that is not possible to override is the color wheel. That's just because of a quirk of the way that the color wheel behaves in the Maestro. It's completely different than pretty much every other channel. But other than that, you can change whatever you want. And from here, from this screen with this kind of bulk editing features from the fixture toggles, the focus and zoom, and in addition, there's also dimmer controls, which are doing exactly the same thing. We can show that again. You've got a clone of the master dimmer. That's the same as the dimmer here on the main screen. It's just really here for your reference, although it does work. We can also set dimming values. So if you've got, for example, let's say I've got these megahex pods and I want to make sure that no matter what, they never go above, let's say 150 because they're just too damn bright. I can set that, and that's static. Of course, I can set that and then save it as a macro. All I have to do is go in, choose those fixtures. I think it also included that party bar. Yes, it's in the same primary group. And I can save that. Actually, it would have included these as well because they're all in primary, and I can save that as dimmer 150, and that's stored in the macro. Of course, I can then go back and put them all back. It didn't include those UV9s because those UV9s don't have a dimmer. In any case, that macro is there. It doesn't matter that the UV9s are in there, because if I compare the modifications, you'll see, well, there isn't any for the UV9s because there's nothing to change, so it doesn't matter. And again, I can turn that on, and it's telling me that these fixtures have been ignored in that macro because their settings are completely the same as what is live, and it won't do anything. But it doesn't matter; it will still affect the rest of the fixtures. And of course, I can stop it. And that's kind of what you can do with the macros. Of course, you can do other settings. You can go in and change any setting which is available through the control panel if it isn't available in the extension screen. Most of the ones that matter are there. Obviously, as I said, the color wheel is the one thing you can't modify, just because of the way it works. Other than that, you can basically modify everything, and you can do it. The majority of what would be the common features you can do straight from here, and you can do them in bulk. So it's a lot more convenient. And obviously, you're not going to be creating these macros necessarily on the fly. You're going to do this in advance, build up a stock of macros and use them. I mean, I can pick one more example that I think could be really useful. Let's say if you're at a wedding and you want to have all white spots on the dance floor, sort of centered on a central point, for example. Well, what we can do is I've just created a queue called Movers All White Spots, which sets my primary group to black, my tertiary group to black, and my secondary group, which is where my moving heads are, to solid color, and the solid color is all white, full brightness. And that'll force them on all white and turn everything else off. Obviously, I could put the pars on a wash or whatever as well. But for argument's sake, let's say that's what we've done with this. So now I've got sort of a queue with the color settings, but what I need is to have a set position for the movers. Well, okay, so what we can do is we can pop over to the fixtures, grab the pan tilt finder, and let's say we go back to our center point, which was around 170 by 90 in my case. That will do. Well, what we can do now is we can start fanning them, and fanning is going to adjust every fixture, either all pointing progressively inwards or all pointing progressively outwards. This only works left and right. This is not fanning up and down, it's fanning left and right. And if I was to drag this over, I can't show you live, but if I was, you would see that all the movers start centering on a point. And I know in my case that around 25 centers them all in a spot right in the center of the room. Now, I've got that central point, and it's there, and it's live, and it's working. And what I want to do now is save that as a macro. But I also know that I need that queue to run. So let's say this is movers white spot, because I've put them on a spot. And I've got it. There we go. There's my macro. But this is where the queue triggers come in. So what you can do with a queue trigger, so the macros have got quite a few sort of chainable events that you can trigger. And one of them is queue triggers. So I know that when I trigger that macro, I'm doing it for my central white spots. I want to trigger at the same time movers all white spots, because I'm going to turn everything white, turn off the other colors, put them all white, put them in the center on the spot. And that's what I want. And when I stop it, I can choose an end queue. So when I stop that macro, I can choose, well, I can trigger another queue, or I can leave it blank, and it will do nothing. It'll leave whatever I started running. But then let's say in my case, I want to go from dance, dance, dance. So I do my white spots, you do whatever dance you want to do, and then I decide, boof, I want to jump into dancing, so I'm going to do like that. So now when I trigger this, first of all, we need to reset them because it won't work. Let's reset them back to defaults. There we go. So we put everything back to where it was. So when I trigger this, it's going to set the position of them all in a central spot, and it's going to trigger the movers all white spots. So I click play, I pop over to the Maestro, and you'll see movers all white spots has started playing all by itself. Then when I'm finished, click stop. I can go back and I can show again that now it's moved off to dance, 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 which is just some random party effect that we've got. But that's exactly how it works. There is also the option for auto stop. So if I want to have, for example, that this will only run for 5 seconds, which is a little bit low, but let's say you can set it, I think, anywhere up to an hour. I only want it to run for 5 seconds. Well, I can start it off, and within 5 seconds, all by itself, it's going to switch off because there's a timer. There it goes. It's off. That's another feature where I can set the macro with an auto stop. I don't need one on this occasion, so I won't put it there. And then that brings us on to move effects triggers. So what are move effects? Well, there's another tab here called move effects, and what this gives you is 6 different patterns which you can trigger on your movers. There isn't any way to sort of specify a dedicated sort of pattern in the Maestro yet. So what these do is they allow you to do exactly that. And there's 6 common patterns. Circle's fanned, which means that all of the movers are moving in a circle, but each one is a little bit delayed after the first one, from left to right, I think. You can put them in a figure of 8, and you can also fan the figure of 8. Of course, you've got an up and down movement where the heads will move up and down, and a left and right movement where the heads will move left and right. Now, to get this working, what you need is the center point, because if you imagine a circle, it's going to have to rotate around a central point. It's no different for a figure of 8, moving up and down, left and right, etc., etc. So we need to set the start point, because it doesn't know until we tell it. But we can do that with the pan tilt finder. And as I mentioned earlier, I know in my case, the central point, which gives me sort of center in the room, is around 170 by about, let's say it's about 85, I think. That's a live setting. But what I can do is I can click Save Center Point. And it will ask, are you sure you want to save the default pan tilt value? So you say, okay. What that's done is it's set it on the fixture as a central value. It's also going to ask you, do you also want to set the pan tilt values for the mover effects? And I click OK, and it updates them. So now you can see that all of those effects have had their pan start, tilt start position set, or tilt start or pan start, depending on the type of thing. And they're pretty much ready to go. So if I click start, then immediately the movers are going to start rotating in a circle. I can stop it. Or I can do a fan circle, and I can stop it, or vice versa, and the same for all of them. I can also change the speed. If I put this down, they're going to circle faster. And I can make the size of the circle smaller or bigger. The defaults are usually around about right, but you can change it and see how it goes. And then you can also change the steps. So the steps is the number of movements. So if you imagine a circle is 360 degrees, you could do it one dot being 1 degree, and you would go around. You need 360 steps to go around in a full circle. But you can actually cut that down and say, well, I don't want to go step by step 360 times. I'll just do it 90 times. Which is what is the default, and that gives you pretty smooth movement, but it's quite fast. The more steps you add, the slower it's going to get. The same with the speed. The lower the speed, the faster, the higher the speed, the slower. So you can play around with the number of steps and the speed. But you've got to remember that the way this is working is by sending persistently lots of messages to your movers, move to this position, move to this position. So it really helps, first of all, if you're using a network cable or Ethernet, rather than using Wi-Fi, because it's going to generate quite a bit of traffic. And also, if you put too many steps or too fast or etc., they might start juddering. The default settings in here seem to work pretty well. I've tested it with, I think it was 8 different fixtures, and it was very smooth, no issues at all, although I usually only use 4. If you've got 30 fixtures, well, I suspect it might get a bit juddery because there's just so many, but I don't think that's a normal use case on average in any case. So those are the move effects. But those move effects, like the cues and the auto stop, etc., can be triggered based on the macro. So if I've got my movers white spot, which is setting the movers all white spots, well, I put them all in the middle, didn't I? But what if I wanted them to move around in a circle? So now I've got that all in there, and I want to trigger that. So if I click go, we're going to see that not only has it started playing movers, it's also moved them to the middle, and then we can see that it's triggered the effect. Of course, that's going to keep going, as we didn't set a stop timer until I press stop. And when I press stop, because we set dance, dance, dance as the next effect, well, that's going. And if we go back to the move effects, well, it stopped. So you can see how you can chain quite a lot of things into the macro. You can start, stop a cue. You can set a move effect. You could even set a move effect that will run when you stop it. Can't think of a reason why I'd do that now, but the possibility is there. And that gives you all of those features, etc., etc. So the last thing, what you can do with a macro is you can actually auto macro them. So this works very similar to how we saw the AutoFog or the AutoEffects earlier, or etc., etc. Obviously, unlike the others, this works from this page, so you need to have it open for it to be working, or it just simply won't run. But what you can actually do is trigger a macro. You can enable this. It's not actually going to do anything until you set a level. Now, there's a minimum interval, which means the minimum gap between it would ever trigger that macro. You can set that whatever you want. Its default's 5 minutes, but you can set it all the way down to a minute. And a minimum runtime. Now, the reason there's a minimum runtime is because you can set an on level and off level. So you can set a macro to come on when the music peaks over a certain level and turn off when it drops below a certain level. Now, if you didn't have a minimum runtime that guaranteed that that macro would stay on for a minimum, in this case, of 30 seconds, and the music is jumping up and down, then you could find a situation where the macro is flapping on and off, and it could get a little bit silly. Although the interval won't let it go on and off, it would give a gap, but that's how it works. So with the auto macro on, what we can do is we can actually use that level to trigger the activity. So let's turn that down for now so it doesn't go over. And that one, there's a minimum interval of 5 minutes, so we've triggered that one more recently. So if I put it, we'd have to wait 5 minutes because it's not going to go off again within that 5 minutes. Let's pick the gobo one. That will do. Let's say we set this level at 95 for on, and let's say 70 for off. So those settings are now in there, and what we can do is we can spike this up. Actually, what I'll do first is I'll turn that minimum interval down to 5 seconds so we don't have to wait 30 seconds for it to come back on. So now if I drag that up, we're going to see, yep, macro has started. Now if we drop it down at some point, oh, there you go, it's dropped off. Went below 70 and the macro stopped. Because of the minimum interval, it's not going to trigger now for a minimum of 5 more minutes. So as we can see, you can actually chain quite a lot of things together with macros. You can trigger them based on sound. You can trigger them manually. You can trigger cues. You can trigger movement effects. You can set them to auto timeout. There's a lot of different options that you can have available with them. It really gives quite a lot of powerful functionality that is just not available yet. I'm sure that it'll come one day, but in the meantime, this lets us get some of this stuff out there already. Now, that's pretty much covering the majority of stuff. So, as we mentioned before, like, we can restore the backup that we took earlier. We just give that a click. Are you sure? Yep. Okay. And there we go. Job done. So basically, all of those fixture settings that we fiddled with. So we can actually prove this if we go into these toggles and toggle some stuff off. Let's mess with the dimmer. We can probably mess with the focus and so on and so on. And then we restore again that backup and let it finish. Backup restored. Reload. You can see all those toggles have gone back to where they was when we took the original backup. Very easy way to get everything back to clean after you've been fiddling and creating lots of macros. Of course, it's always good to check what's the content of them macros, because it's possible that you could accidentally store something that you didn't realize or you wasn't planning on. This one, like we see, has an awful lot of changes with all the gobos on and off and other things. Yeah, that's worth keeping an eye on. And I think that's pretty much everything. Obviously, since then, we've also added some links. You can get back to the Facebook group. You can send a message to me if you need help. And of course, you can always get a link to the source code, as this is all published openly on GitHub. And it's fully available. I think that is pretty much it for today. So, as always, if there's any questions, drop a comment. Feel free to ping a message. If you find any bugs, I'd love to hear, as we'll be able to fix them. And if you have any suggestions or improvements, of course, that would also be super to hear from you, and feedback is always very welcome. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoy using the extension. I hope it helps you solve some of your problems as it has me, and otherwise, thank you very much for watching.